Hello, Daphne here with another video for you. This is titled, The Titles of My Favorite Books from Around the World. I love stories from different locations all over the world. And here are my top picks that I would like to share with you. The first one comes from Australia. It's a very touching story about a lighthouse keeper and his wife. Here they are living on this desolate island when one day a boat washes up on their shore, and in it is a man who is deceased and a live baby. They take in the baby and nurture that child for years and years, but the consequences of their taking in this baby are quite interesting, which I won't tell you about, but it's a love story, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I hope you will too. So that's my recommendation from Off the Shores of Australia. Okay, this next book is absolutely the most fabulous book. I had to read it twice. I enjoyed it so much. It's the story about 9 intrepid American men who were from all over Washington State, attending the University of Washington. None of them knew each other. None of them knew anything about rowing, but they happened to get together over the years. They had a masterful coach and a brilliant British boat builder on their team. The amusing part to me was that everybody wrote off these men as not having a chance to win any races against powerful teams like the University of California. But they worked very, very hard and kept on going. And then, in 1936, they represented the United States in the Olympics in Berlin, Germany. And those boys rode their hearts out right smack in front of Hitler, who was convinced that his Aryan stalwart crews were going to kick the Americans right off the race course. Well, the opposite happened. The Americans kicked the butts of the Germans, in spite of them putting them in a very difficult lane where the wind conditions were very challenging. They still beat the Germans, who had the best lane of all. So this is a book of incredible courage, of 9 interesting men, all of whom's lives are described in this book, and their triumphant end when they won rowing in the 1936 Olympics. I almost jumped for joy when I read this book. I just thought it was such an inspiration, a tribute to true determination and love of a sport. So I hope if you haven't read it, you will. Now here's another book that I found lovely to read. It's titled The Nightingale. It took place in France in World War II. And one of the stories that weaves through this book is about the underground and how they operated. And goodness gracious, did the underground make huge contributions to the successes in the Second World War. They were such an incredible support group. And through this book runs a love story. Of course, as everybody knows, that's my favorite. But I also like the historic content of this novel. All right, moving on. Snowflower and the Secret Fan took place in 19th century China. In those days, they were still binding the feet of girls because they believed that tiny feet were much more attractive to the opposite sex. But it was a cruel and harsh procedure, and the girls suffer greatly. But there was an inspirational story that flowed through this book about Snowflower and her secret fan. On that secret fan, 2 girls who became friends had a secret language which they wrote and communicated with each other through this fan. And the whole story was just a wonderful story. And plus, I like the fact that it gave you a sense of what China was like way back when. But mainly, the friendship of these two girls was incredibly touching, and I recommend this book because of my thorough enjoyment of it. Next, we have The Winthrop Woman. Why I like this story is because it took place at a time when America was in her infancy. The Winthrop Woman was in Massachusetts, and it's her struggle against the men, the society, and I loved reading about the history at that time and what went on. It was just fascinating. And with a lot of determination, a lot of guts, the Winthrop Woman triumphed in the end. So that made this a very lovely story to know that her hard work was worth it in the end. Oh, this next book, Dr. Zhivago. I read it before the movie came out, and it captured my imagination. The history of Russia is so fascinating. It's such an incredible combination of beauty and tragedy and history, an incredible history. And I loved, of course, as you all know, the love story in this book. But that was also greatly affirmed after seeing the movie with Omar Sharif and Julie Christie, because theirs was such a beautiful love story. But basically, the combination between the history of Russia and a love story made this absolutely one of my favorite reads ever. Last but not least, Out of Africa. As everybody knows, Africa is one of my favorite places on planet Earth. And this book by Isaac Dinesen, a true story of a European woman traveling to Nairobi in the early days of the colony there, is a remarkable story of courage and grace. And I loved hearing about the country in those days, the animals she loved, the plants, the farm she lived on, and of course the people that she became so fond of. And then, as a result of her illness, she had to leave Africa. And before she left, she went to this club, this very exclusive club in Nairobi. And I am pleased to tell you that I got the pleasure of staying at that club on a trip to Nairobi several years ago. And in that club, you may remember from the movie, there is a private room in which Meryl Streep was invited to join all men. Only men were allowed in that room. But in the movie, because of her extraordinary work in Africa and her popularity, she was invited in to say goodbye before she left Africa for the last time. Anyway, I got to see that room. And would you believe that women are still not allowed? True story. But I did have fun peeking in the window to see what it looked like, a very famous room from Out of Africa. So, my friends, those are my around the world book recommendations. I hope you'll get a chance to read any and all of them and have a wonderful time and a wonderful experience doing so.